Charlotte realised that here was an opportunity too good to miss.
Charlotte set up her own tribute to these Parisian houses on King's Place, a passage of Pall Mall, and ironically called them nunneries. Here gentlemen could have more than just a quick fumble. Her girls were given lessons in elocution and deportment, and taught music and dance in order to erase any whiff of the streets. At the height of her renown, Charlotte's bedchambers hosted the leading lights of Georgian society, everyone from the Earl of Sandwich to the Prince of Wales, and you had to be rich to get in. The bill for an evening's entertainment of music, dinner and refined conversation could run as high as £100, perhaps more if one required the services of a virgin.
The madams, or bawds as they were known, were always hunting for new faces. Naive young country girls were often the easiest pickings.
These young women would be offered clothes, they'd be offered jewellery, and they'd be kitted out in quite a luxurious style to attract the gentlemen on the town. And they would also be offered board and lodgings by the board. What the women didn't understand, and they were usually quite young, from 12, 13 years old, they didn't realise that these board and lodgings were not free. They'd have to be repaid along with all the money for the clothes and the jewellery, and this meant that they increasingly became in debt to the board, and this was a way of keeping the young girls in prostitution because they had to repay the madam.
Disturbingly, very young girls were also advertised in the pages of Harris's lists. The books reveal a shocking truth about these innocent victims of predatory men. They were often virgins who'd been raped and then forced into prostitution. The lists are full of euphemisms for rape, like seduction or debauching.
Polly is a little fluttering child, about 14 years of age, has full dark eyes and a projecting mouth with tolerable good teeth. She was debauched about 10 months ago by the noted Captain Jones. She's passed from Maidenhead since that period 20 times.
There was in the 18th century a real obsession, particularly with virginity and purity and youth, and the youth that seemed to signify that. There are, for example, large numbers of rapes of young girls from the age of 7 or 8, which were tried, and many of which were convicted and led to an execution, but which are nevertheless the tip of an iceberg of sexuality that's really quite scary and very unpleasant.
Mrs. Orwell, Denzil Street. This lady is remarkably expert at decoying pretty-faced children who are left unguarded in the street. She lives as openly by the sale of human flesh as the butcher does mutton or beef.
But the horror implied in some of the entries in the list never dimmed their popularity.
Although Sam Derrick, the list's author, boozed and gambled away the profits from his books, he'd still managed to reinvent himself as a gentleman. He could be found hobnobbing amongst the aristocracy and gentry in the fashionable town of Bath, where he became a favourite of the ladies of society. When the coveted position of Master of the Ceremonies at Bath fell vacant, Derrick found himself nominated. Needless to say, Derrick made the most of his esteemed position and swaggered about town. But his good luck wasn't to last.
Given his sexual appetites, it would have been miraculous if Derrick had avoided catching either the pox or the clap, what we now call syphilis and gonorrhea.
Basically, anybody who had sex outside of marriage was likely to catch it. Nearly every prostitute who had been on the town for more than 2 years would have been referred to as clapped out, having had venereal disease so many times.
Women, of course, are infected by their husbands. Babies, sometimes infected by men who were convinced that if they could have sexual intercourse with an innocent person, a clean person, they would be able to pass their disease on to the other party and they would be cured.
After months of suffering from tertiary syphilis, Derrick died in March 1769. However, the lists didn't die with him.
After Derrick's death, the lists were kept in print by a succession of publishers. One reason for the continued popularity was because they identified which women were diseased.
Miss Young, number 6, Cumberland Court. She has very lately had the wickedness to leave a certain hospital before the cure of a certain distemper, and has thrown her contaminated carcass on the town again, for which we hold her inexcusable.
The obvious sign of syphilis was when the disease destroyed the soft tissues of the face, in particular the end of your nose, which was appalling because it was very evident, everyone could see, and there was only one cause. If you didn't have a nose, you had syphilis.
Charlotte Hayes always insisted that the women working for her undergo a medical examination. Jack Harris's women signed contracts agreeing to forfeit £20 if they ever lied about their cleanliness.
Hogarth's picture of the prostitute dying of venereal disease is one of the most poignant, mainly because the quacks haggling over her were the ones who've taken all the money, giving her false cures. Mercury was offered as a cure, and one of the intentions was to induce sweating and salivation in the patient, and this was meant to bring out the toxins in the body. However, because it was a poison, it was actually slowly killing the patient.
Mrs. Berry, King's Place, an arrant brimstone of Irish birth, who would impose upon us a stale and battered commodity. She's undergone too many salivations. The power of mercury has lost its effect upon her. In a word, she's almost rotten, and her breath is cadaverous.
Despite the dangers, the clients kept coming back for more.
After his release from prison, Jack Harris went straight back to the life that he knew, pimping, this time as the proprietor of the Rose Tavern in Covent Garden. The Rose had always been a sleazy dive, even when Hogarth painted it as part of the rake's progress. One of its specialities was naked posture girls who used to pose teasingly on the tabletops. But Jack Harris's heyday had come to a close. He died in 1794 and was buried here at the churchyard at St. Paul's, Covent Garden. The lists only outlived him by a year.
By the end of the 18th century, Harris's lists had run their course. They'd been in print for 38 years, but the spirit of Sam Derrick's original catalogue of local characters had long gone. The last publishers of the lists were the brothers John and James Roach. They paid a heavy price for the privilege. John was found guilty of libel in 1794, and James was sent to Newgate the following year for continuing to publish the books. Having outlived Sam Derrick, Jack Harris, and even the lists themselves, the last person standing was Charlotte Hayes. Although she had attempted to retire, she could never free herself from the world of vice she'd been born into. As a former prostitute and a brothel keeper, it was impossible for her to reinvent herself as a truly respectable woman. After years of living as a recluse, she died in complete obscurity in 1813, aged 85.
We often make the mistake of assuming that life in earlier centuries was more romantic than our own. Beneath our image of an elegant and refined Georgian era lies the reality, an exploitative, hypocritical and iniquitous 18th century where money and wit alone ensured survival. Over 1,000 women appear on the lists, a veritable army of society's ignored and voiceless who've serviced, amongst others, members of the aristocracy and the royal family. Harris's lists provide us with a unique glimpse into their world, dispelling our rose-tinted concept of the past as a prudish and moral place and replacing it with a darker vision of Georgian London, where lives were bought and sold, and anyone and any pleasure could be had for the right price.
He wrote the scandalous bestseller that caused uproar but paid the price. John Cleland, The Curse of Success, is next on BBC4.